necessary to establish phenomena as intrinsically other than their conditions. Without individual essences, there are not substantial differences. Without substantial differences, there are no absolute others by means of which to characterize phenomena. Third, in order to characterize phenomena as essentially different from their conditions, it is important to be able to characterize them independently. Otherwise, each depends for its identity on the other, and they are not truly distinct in nature. But the whole point of otherness' essence is that things in virtue of having it are essentially dependent. So the view is in fact internally contradictory. Given that things have no intrinsic nature, they are not essentially different. Given that lack of difference, they are interdependent. But given that interdependence, there cannot be the otherness needed to build otherness essence out of dependence. Now, on the reading of this chapter that I am suggesting, we can see conditions simply as useful explanans. Using this language, Nagarjuna is urging that even distinguishing between explanans and explanandum as distinct entities, with the former containing potentially what the latter has actually, is problematic. What we are typically confronted with in nature is a vast network of interdependent and continuous processes, and carving out particular phenomena for explanation or for use in explanations depends more on our explanatory interests and language than on joints nature. Presence to us. Through addressing the question of the potential existence of an event in its conditions, Nagarjuna hints at this concealed relation between praxis and reality. Next, Nagarjuna notes, 4, that in invoking an event or entity as a condition in explanation we do not thereby ascribe it any causal power. For power to act does not have conditions. There is no power to act without conditions. There are no conditions without power to act. Nor do any have the power to act. This is the beginning of Nagarjuna's attack on the causal power, cement of the universe view of causation and his contrastive development of his regularity view of condition-dependent arising. Causal powers, according to those who posit them, are meant to explain the causal nexus. They are meant to explain how it is that causes bring about their effects, which is itself supposed to be otherwise inexplicable. But, Nagarjuna argues, if there were a causal power, it itself, as a phenomenon, would either have to have conditions or not. If the former, there is a vicious explanatory regress, for then one has to explain how the powers to act are themselves brought about by the conditions, and this is the very link presupposed by the friend of powers to be inexplicable. One could posit powers the conditions have to bring about powers and powers the powers have to bring about effects. But this just moves one step further down the regress. If, on the other hand, one suggests that the powers have no condition, one is stuck positing uncaused and inexplicable occult entities as the explanans of causation. If what is to be explained is how it is that all phenomena are brought about by causal processes, it is a bit embarrassing to do so by reference to unobserved entities that are explicitly exempted from this otherwise universal condition. Moreover, there is then no explanation of how these powers arise and why they come to be where they are. This is all startlingly anticipatory of Wittgenstein's famous echo of Hume in the Tractatus. 6. The whole modern conception of the world is founded on the illusion that the so-called laws of nature are the explanations of natural phenomena. 6. Thus people today stop at the laws of nature, treating them as something inviolable, just as God and fate were treated in past ages. And in fact both are right and both are wrong, though the view of the ancients is clearer in so far as they have a clear and acknowledged terminus, while the modern system tries to make it look as if everything were explained. In the next two lines, as we will often see in the text, Nagarjuna is speaking in two senses: first, from the conventional standpoint, and second, from the ultimate. In the third line of the verse, he notes that conditions can certainly, in a perfectly legitimate sense, be appealed to as the things that bring about their effects. In that sense, we can say that they are efficacious, that they have the power to act. But in the fourth line he emphasizes that we cannot, so to speak, quantify over this power, identifying it as a phenomenon or property possessed by the conditions. There are no powers in that sense. Just as we can act for someone else's sake, despite there being no sakes, we can appeal to the potency of conditions, despite there being no such potency. The trick is to make correct use of conventional locutions without reifying denotata for all of the terms. For example, we might ask a farmer, do these seeds have the power to sprout, as a way of asking whether they are fertile? It would be then perfectly appropriate for him to answer in the affirmative. But if we then asked him to show us where in the seed the power is located, he would be quite justified in regarding us as mad. Our desire for light does not exert some occult force on the lights. Nor is there anything to be found in the flicking of the switch other than the plastic, metal, movement, and connections visible to the naked eye. Occult causal powers are singularly absent. On the other hand, Nagarjuna points out in this discussion that this does not mean that conditions are explanatorily impotent. In a perfectly ordinary sense, not the sense that the metaphysicians of causation have in mind, our desire is active in the production of light. But not in the sense that it contains light potentially, or some special causal power that connects our minds to the bulbs. What is it, then, about some sets of event pairs, but not others, that make them dependently related, if not some causal link present in those cases, but not in others? 5. These give rise to those. So these are called conditions. As long as those do not come from these. Why are these not non-conditions? One might answer this question, Nagarjuna notes in the opponent's suggestion in the first 2 lines, by noting the presence of some relation of giving rise to, realized in a power. But, he rejoins in the final 2 lines, this move is blocked, for having shown the absence and the theoretical impotence of such a link, it would follow that there would be no conditions. Nagarjuna hence suggests here that it is the regularities that count. Flickings give rise to illuminations. So they are conditions of them. If they didn't, they wouldn't be. Period. Explanation relies on regularities. Regularities are explained by reference to further regularities. Adding active forces or potentials adds nothing of explanatory utility to the picture. In reading the next few verses, we must be hermeneutically cautious and pay careful attention to Nagarjuna's use of the term existent, tib, yodpa, skt, sat, and its negative contrastive, non-existent, tib, medpa, asat. For Nagarjuna is worried here about inherent existence and inherent non-existence, as opposed to conventional existence or non-existence. For a thing to exist inherently is for it to exist in virtue of possessing an essence. For it to exist independently of other entities and independently of convention. For a thing to be inherently non-existent is for it to not exist in any sense at all, not even conventionally or dependently. With this in mind, we can see how Nagarjuna defends dependent arising while rejecting causation. 6. For neither an existent nor a non-existent thing is a condition appropriate.